The Auburn football spring game is just around the corner, but sadly there's a little bit of injury news coming out of spring practice as we head to that point. There's one significant one, especially for the offense, that we're going to talk about along with many others. Let's discuss those and their effect on the program right now. But first, I want to welcome you back to the channel, whether you're an Auburn family member or a fan of another persuasion just visiting us. This is the E2C network where the Auburn family speaks. Our content here may tend to be Auburn sports heavy, but if it's orange and blue, it's what we do. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our content, and thank you to members of our booster club like Dustin Smith who help produce videos like this. Not to start this video off on a bit of a negative note, but doesn't it seem like as Auburn fans there's these constants that keep happening to us, whether it be 11 a.m. kickoffs in our offense or even defense just the team not getting off to a great start as it is. It always seems like in spring practice, there's at least one significant injury that you didn't really want to see happen going into the 8A game and into the summer. Now, I know that Auburn's not exclusive to this issue. Every team goes through it, but it just seems to be the kind of trend for us. Well, news broke this last week that Jarquez Hunter, a backup running back for Auburn football, back up behind Tank Bigsby, the star running back, was going to be out for the next several weeks/months. Now, the timeline is kind of variable. I've seen it thrown out 8 to 10 weeks, 2 to 3 months. The basic gist of this is that Jarquez Hunter, backup running back and going to be a huge part of the offense next year, will miss the rest of spring and most of the summer, but most importantly, as planned right now, would be back for fall practice. There's not really a lot of details actually about what happened, but we do know that this is something that occurred during practice, or at least was aggravated more during practice. This could have been something that he'd been dealing with and then just going through the routines of practice as they get a little bit more rougher and more physical throughout the duration of spring practice. Could have been bothered him a little bit more. So they're gonna go ahead and get this taken care of so he can be ready for the fall. It's described as a minor knee procedure that should just clean up, I think is the word that I've seen used, some issues that have been going on down there. You definitely want to make sure you take care of that as a running back. What this does mean, though, if you want to put a positive spin on things, is that already where you get an opportunity during spring practice to get a look at a lot of different athletes at positions that don't necessarily get the time during the season, that is going to be very much the case here. Because let's be honest, Tank Bigsby is going to get some reps, but we really don't want to use him a whole lot during the spring game and spring practice because he's our workhorse and we want to save that for the season. That means that Damari Alston and other names like Sean Jackson, and there's other running backs too, are going to get a lot of extra time that they probably wouldn't have gotten. That would be splitting the time between Tank Bigsby and Jarquez Hunter with Jarquez now out. So that's a really good thing for the individuals, but for the depth and the continuation of this Auburn running back room as time goes on, especially with the expected departure of Bigsby after this year. So that's the big news with Jarquez Hunter and his injury. What I want to use this for is to springboard into a discussion about the rest of the injuries that have been occurring either before, during, and leading into the rest of the spring practice and how it's going to affect the football team. Obviously, the big one out there that everybody is paying attention to is Zach Calzada and how he's progressing with his previous shoulder injury that he's been working through even before he arrived here at Auburn. Now, he's been limited in reps and the types of things that he can get involved with, obviously no contact things for quarterback situations. So he hasn't been really involved in the entire race for the quarterback spot this spring, although most expect him to be in the front of that, or at least competing for the front of that when we get into the fall. We're gonna keep going with that because the majority of these injuries that are being reported are coming out of the offense. Not something that you really wanted to see, especially with the way that the offense struggled at times this year in trying to find its identity and trying to get its feet on the ground under Coach Harsin and Coach Keesaw under their leadership for what the offense identity is going to look like. Let's specifically talk about the offensive line unit. It's a topic of conversation it's been like for the last years. What is the offensive line going to do? Are they going to improve? And it's hard to do that when you're dealing with a lot of injuries that are either current, maybe getting better, or being added to this list. It's hard to develop a lot of continuity and cohesion across that line if this continues to happen. We've known about certain nagging injuries that have been kind of maintained throughout the last season for Nick Brahms, the starting center, and starting tackle Austin Troxell. They're just going to be limited during practice, probably limit the amount of contact that happens, and I would doubt that you'd see them a whole lot during the spring game. Speaking of previous injuries on the offensive line, Brandon Council, who's kind of been in and out at a starting or backup position along the offensive line, is still dealing with an injury that he had to recover from and have a procedure for him in the offseason. So he is not going to be participating as well. Let's keep going through the offense, and we're going to talk about the other unit on the offensive scheme that's a little bit worrisome, and that's wide receivers. Now, the big question here has been who's going to step up. Shedrick Jackson seems to be the leader there and is probably going to be that going through the rest of the season, but who's going to be number 2 guy? We all thought it was going to be Javarius Johnson. It probably is going to be. Well, he sustained a little bit of an injury in practice. He is expected to be back as well, but something that you want to watch who's trying to establish himself as the number 2 guy alongside Jackson. Add to the list J.J. Evans, a name that a lot of people have wanted to see rise through the ranks of the wide receiver depth chart. It's going to be even harder for him to do that now. He has now had to have a knee procedure for something that happened during spring practice that will keep him out for approximately 8 weeks. I'm not super worried about the injuries on the wide receiver right now because it's such a wide open competition out there outside of Shedrick Jackson. I think personally it's going to benefit the wide receiver room to get as many looks at as many different wide receivers, especially some of these new names like Camden Brown and Jay Fair coming into the mix. Now, there are some on the defensive front, but they're not necessarily discouraging, and a lot of them we already knew about. For instance, Owen Pepo, who was nagged by injuries all last season that kept him out of action a lot. He's simply going through the recovery process and is not participating in very much during spring practice. He's obviously the leader of the defense and frankly the team as well. Getting him back into the mix is going to be a key thing during this summer. Defensive tackle position. Jeffrey Imba had a shoulder injury that he came into camp with. So not something that he sustained while he was here, but something that is keeping him out of practice. Marquise Burks, also at defensive tackle, has had a little bit of another, we'll call it a tweak, that's kept him limited but is expected to continue going through practice. And then finally, Zion Puckett at defensive back, expected to be a leader as part of that group, been limited in practice for now. And finally, Anders Carlson. We all know that he tore his ACL at the end of last season. He's been seen kicking mid-range field goals, which is an encouraging sign in his recovery road. So that's the list of the players so far that we know that have been injured, whether it be significant, whether it be somewhat minor and just certain limitations, but also the bigger news, Jarquez Hunter being out at the running back position for the rest of spring and a lot of summer. That's the biggest news. I want to know from you now in the comments section below, what do you make of all this? What sticks out to you? What do you think is bad about it? But also if there's anything good that you think comes out of it, some names that you're excited to see get some extra time, let me know down there in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this type of content, please do help support it by smashing that like button. And if you want more from us, be sure to hit the subscribe along with the notification bell so you don't miss any of our uploads or live streams. There's other ways to help support our content listed in the description below, such as becoming a channel member here by hitting the join button or heading over to patreon.com/E2C Network to join the Booster Club. Thank you for tuning into the E2C Network, where the Auburn family speaks. War Eagle.